today we're going to be talking about the shift of the ages and the new earth. And in order to do that, we have to begin a conversation about the cycles of time, the nature of time. So in the very first part of this, we're going to be talking about the age of Aquarius, but as we get into the last half of it, I'm going to be explaining to you the mechanisms of how the cycles of time actually work. So let's begin with talking about where we actually are. The Theosophists actually say that we entered into 1 degree of Aquarius in 1939. It takes us 72 years to go 1 degree. So from 0 degrees, not 1 degree, it was 0 degrees of Aquarius. From 0 degrees to 1 degree would have been 1939 to 2011. So that would have meant that 2012 would have been the very first year of entering 1 degree of Aquarius, okay? And so we're going to be looking at what has changed since 1939, which is a whole heck of a lot. So we have to ask, what do we have to look forward to? Each age is 30 degrees wide. Each age basically takes us around 2,160 years to go through. So we're just at the very edge of Aquarius, and we've already seen such changes in the last 70 years. Certainly, Aquarius is about an increase in technology. Aquarius is an air age. It's ruled by air, but also by that etheric energy of water or knowledge being poured down from the great cosmic ocean from the heavens. So we have increased technology that has gone, computers, cell phones, fax machines, DVDs, fiber optics, all of these things in the last, 80 something years. Space travel opens up to us. And of course, when you look at the glyph of Aquarius, it's always the man or the woman pouring down the waters from the stars. So the star people are here. Space travel and we weren't even aware that there were other galaxies till the beginning of the 20th century. Over about 100 years ago, we finally got telescopes where we discovered that there were other galaxies, okay? So that opens up the minds, like we're not the only galaxy. For all the billions of stars in this galaxy, they now think that there are over 300 billion galaxies that we've been able to see. That's just like beyond the beyond. My brain can't even compute it. So we begin to understand more about our place in the universe, where we are and what the universe might even look like. And again, we could only be looking at a small portion of something that is even larger than we can even fathom. We now know that our star is one of 100 billion stars in our galaxy alone, and that there are over 100 to 300 billion other galaxies. Now, what happened with this was they pointed this camera and the telescope in time-lapse photography into what they thought was a relatively empty part of space. Every one of these are a galaxy. They found that there were galaxies everywhere. And as we know, galaxies are, billions of stars. We also see in the age of Aquarius great advances in medicine and chemistry. And even though we know there's been a misuse by the pharmaceuticals, they do sometimes save lives. They do. I mean, they've saved my life, Surgery, I'm very much about holistic medicine, and I live out of that. But surgery and antibiotics have saved my life at least a half a dozen times in my life. So, we're doing things now like heart replacements and, organ replacements and things that we never thought we'd be able to do. So it is quite incredible. But when there is a wave of naturopaths and also traditional medical doctors and nurses that are beginning to bring these two things together. And it's slow going because, of course, the pharmaceuticals and the AMA would like to kind of hold on to their, financial power structure. But more and more, there are holistic doctors that are opening to be friends with traditional ones, and there are traditional doctors that have discovered, for all the good that they can do, that there are limits to what they can do. And of course, cancer is one of those diseases that's caused us to try to look beyond chemotherapy and radiation. We also have discoveries about the atomic nature of reality through microscopes. So we are discovering the little world inside, and that the little world in many ways reflects the big world. And inside the little world, of course, we've discovered the atom and the power of the atom and the splitting of the atom that can create, yes, the atomic bomb or the nuclear bomb. We're discovering quantum physics. Since about 1920, in the 20th century, we began to discover that our thoughts actually can affect subatomic matter. Now, this means that since subatomic matter makes up atomic matter, in other words, little matter makes up big matter, if we could affect subatomic matter, we could actually affect matter, right? Think about it, and of course we knew this long ago in the time of Atlantis when, we were doing telekinetic things and we were using what's called magic, okay? What is magic? It's the mind can affect the outcome. How many of you have actually tried to manifest a parking place and lo and behold you did so? Exactly. How many of you have thought about somebody for a couple days and suddenly the phone rings and the person calls you or you get a letter from them? That is quantum physics. That is an expression of how we are connected at the subatomic level with one another. Consciousness does affect matter. And also string theory. String theory is the idea that behind the subatomic particles, where we've come up with hundreds of other little particles like leptons and gluons and neutrinos and things like that, that actually that the universe has these like little strings that they're playing different notes or different sounds like a symphony, and that this explains basically all of these different leptons and neutrons and all the things that basically, now there are hundreds of them, subatomic particles. This is what the mystics and the masters have been telling us for years, is that the universe is vibration, that it is sound, and that behind, in the beginning was the Word. That's what the Bible tells us. In the beginning was the sound current, and from the sound, with the phonons, comes the light, the photons. And from those, the world of matter is created. And so this is very exciting. I love the work of Michio Kaku and some of the other quantum physicists that are around that really, they talk about it as M theory. And he actually says it's not just the idea of multi-dimensional realities being formed by these different vibrational patterns, but he also calls it mother theory, that the mother is it's behind it all, basically. I think that's really great. There's some really enlightened scientists out there and more of them coming online. We talked yesterday about the template for creation, which is called the Fibonacci spiral. And I talked about what it actually means and why it is the unfolding of the universe that we've discovered all around us. From the power of the one creator who splits itself in two as the divine masculine and feminine comes the mother, father, God. From the joining of the Mother, Father, God with the place where they're joined in the middle, the Vesica Pisces, comes the power of three. When we add 3 and 2 together, which of course 3 is the original trinity of the one and the mother and father, to the 2, the daughter and son, you have 5 and so forth. And this is all the reason that it unfolds in this way. And this is what it looks like, of course. This is what it looks like. We see it reflected in the world all around us as the nautilus shell, the unfolding of flowers, and the very underpinning of the nature of reality. We see it in the unfurling of trees. We see it literally in the poles of the planets. Over and over again. We see it in our own north and south magnetic poles, in the poles of the galaxies. It's repeated again and again, giving us keys to understanding the very nature of microscopic and macroscopic reality. This is the fractal universe that continuously repeats, reminding us of Thoth's Hermetic law, as above, so below, as below, so above. He was so wise because he was a scientist and he was also a spiritual initiate. Today, modern science is exploring the microscopic world of our bodies, and these are actually pictures of cells, real pictures. Is that just like gorgeous? That's just like amazing. I love the color too. I think it's really great. And what do you think this is a picture of? The eye. This is the eye. And doesn't it kind of look like the sun, the black sun behind it all? Also kind of looks like black holes, but everything radiates in or out from these center points. So as you know, as we see it in the microscopic world, it's repeated in the macroscopic. We also, of course, have finally gotten into the discovery of DNA and the very codes of life. But of course, we have to ask, how is this information being used? And you know, science for the sake of science, as we know, can get us in trouble. Science without any moral or ethical principles can really get us into trouble. And we hear stories about this with the experiments that supposedly have been done in the Dulce area, where they've been trying to combine human DNA with animal DNA, and you know, there's a 10-level facility, and you know, if you just think about the poor soul that got drawn into that body, what a travesty. And this, of course, is one of the things that happened in the last, you know, few centuries of Atlantis, where they basically overstepped their law, science for the sake of science. We just want to find out if we could do it, so we're going to do it without any compassion for the suffering that they would create in the subjects that would have to inhabit those bodies. So now, one of the things we hear a lot about is junk DNA. I want you to notice that this graph tells us that 97 to 98% of all of our DNA is what's called junk DNA. So it's clearly not junk DNA. And protein synthesis DNA is only 2 to 3%. So it cannot be junk DNA, but I think they named it that so that we would not look too closely into it. Because in fact, I believe that this is a key to our hyperdimensional nature. This is a key to our ability to access our spiritual gifts and our spiritual powers, like clairvoyance and clairaudience. DNA certainly is literally like a replication of our Enda and Pingala, our sympathetic and parasympathetic, our male and female. It's a replication of the synchronic lines. It's a representation of the ley lines. I mean, it's literally like what the Mayans call the Hunab Ku and the Kuak Sum. The Kuak Sum is the cord that connects us to the great central sun, or the source of all things. The Hunab Ku is source of all things. We might think of it in our way of thinking in the Christian world is it's the Christ light. You know, it's the central sun, the great central sun that we're connecting to. The DNA acts as an antenna receiver for energies coming in from the cosmos. Okay, and it can be changed and shaped based on vibration, based on light, and based on sound, based on thought, based on emotion. It's an antenna that receives and also transmits. And hidden within our DNA is not only our ancestral memory, DNA of all the different extraterrestrial species that have come down here that have interacted with us, but also our spiritual abilities, our ability to access our telekinetic abilities, our ability to raise our vibrations and turn invisible and walk through walls, our abilities to levitate, our abilities for telepathy, for clairvoyance, clairaudience, for clairsentience, claircognitive ability. We have so much hidden within our DNA that we have not even really figured out how to access. So I think what they're calling the junk DNA, which just tells people, oh, well, don't look over there in the trash pile, there's really nothing over there. I think it's kind of like tell the big lie long enough and everybody will believe it. You know, so the spin doctors put a spin on it in order to not have us really go into asking, well, what could it possibly be? Making up 97, 98% of who we actually really are. Now, one of the things that biologist Bruce Lipton, who I had the pleasure of speaking on the circuit with him at a Gaia conference in Mount Shasta last summer, and he's a lovely guy, a really good writer, amazing biologist and researcher. He actually has found the science behind the discovery that love relaxes the DNA and allows us to expand our potential, allows us to access more of who we truly are. And fear and stress, which is of course what we have in a lot of our societies today, wind up contracting the DNA so we have less access to who we are. So when Jesus talks about the power of love, he's not kidding. It opens us up to who we are. It opens us up to the universe. It opens us up to each other. It opens us up to the possibility of being in harmony and tune with the universe. And the more stress we have, the more fear, the more contractive, the more we back up and move away from possibility. And not only outer possibility, but also our own inner gifts, our own access to our own ability to tune in. This is one of the reasons why many times when people have a loved one that dies and they go into despair and grief, maybe their person that died is there going, hey, I'm not dead. I have a last message. I'm going to be fine. They can't see them, but then the next door neighbor sees them or hears them, or the spirit is able to communicate with someone that's not so emotionally stressed out, because the very stress or grief that we're going through creates a cloud over us where the messages can't get through. And we all go through periods like that, which is why we got to work in community and we need each other, because sometimes when you're not tuned in, you might be, okay? And when I'm not tuned in, you might be. And that's kind of why it really works better in a community. So our DNA is similar to the Kundalini. Hey Katie, nice to see you. The Kundalini serpent energies of enlightenment. If you think about it, really the DNA has the same basic shape, doesn't it, as the Inda and the Pingala. It has the same energies as the Caduceus sign that brings the Kundalini up the central nervous system through all three of these systems, a triadic system, and awakens, the Kundalini at the base of the spine, which opens the third eye, the pineal gland, and allows us to fly free from our bodies. That's what this symbol is all about. It's an initiatic symbol. Okay, it's a hermetic symbol. It's not just about healing. It's about spiritual awakening and the ability to soul travel and leave our bodies. So our DNA is definitely connected with our ultimate enlightenment species, and this serpentine energy is part of that. It's so interesting that we've been taught to fear the snake, particularly in the Abrahamic religions, but if you go back, Moses had a serpent staff, didn't he? That's what he used to part the Red Sea. Okay, that's what he used. That was his thing, and it was just one serpent staff, like one staff with one serpent. That's like Asclepius, but that was only one. That was like the second level of initiation. The third level of initiation, the master level. You remember me speaking about the 3 levels of initiation yesterday? The healers that wore green, the historians and bards that wore blue, and the masters that wore white. So, the one snake is like you've achieved the top of the first level, okay? This 2 snakes is really either the second or the third level, probably the third level of initiation, because it tells us that you've managed to balance your male and female and achieve this place of opening your third eye. If you go back to Egypt, they had the uraeus, the little snake, right at the third eye. Do we really think that they wanted to wear cobras on their heads? No. It was a hermetic symbol representing someone who had awakened their kundalini and awakened their third eye and achieved a level of enlightenment. This is all hermetics. So I find it very interesting that somehow the poor little snake that used to be associated with scientists, it used to be associated with wisdom and knowledge in every culture of the world until, unfortunately, Christianity got a hold of it and the Abrahamic religions, and now, of course, we've been told, it's not good to eat from the tree of knowledge. Okay, let's dumb ourselves down and not be knowledgeable. It's so crazy. I mean, it's just a crazy world that we live in. So what are the scientists doing with this knowledge? Well, we all know about Dolly, the poor little sheep that got cloned, and she didn't live that long. But, what's that, 20 years ago, 25 years ago? What, do you think they've been sitting on their hands since then? No. I think that they've been doing experiments they really don't want us to know anything about. One of the conversations is up for debate is whether they should revive prehistoric animals. Now, do you think? I think that's a little crazy. I mean, probably the mastodons are pretty nice people. You know, they were vegetarians. You know, big. But after some of the animals I showed you yesterday, giant sloths that were 10 feet tall, bears that were 15 feet tall, ostriches that were 20 feet tall. I don't really think this is the proper use of our resources. Why don't we preserve the species we have?
Right.
Why don't we help the ones that are still living instead of hunting them for their tiger skins or their aphrodisiac purposes? It's just crazy. Another way that we're using it that seemed okay in the beginning but really went out too far. In the beginning they were trying to make bigger food, more food for a bigger population. Well, that makes sense. If you went to Disney World and World of Tomorrow, that was one of the things in the 50s and 60s. We're going to have tomatoes the size of basketballs, okay? But what's happened now is they're combining things like rat DNA with tomatoes. Why in the world would anybody combine rat DNA with a tomato? The body does not know how to process that. Well, their reasoning was, well, it'll make it so that they don't go bad and they are more weather durable and so forth. But the body can't process it, so people wind up getting sick. So these are some of the staples that they've invaded: wheat, corn, soy. And those things are in almost everything. Tomatoes, some tomatoes, peppers, chickens that get irradiated in some cases, but others not. I mean, I'm all for the happy free-range vegetarian fed chickens, and so I'm willing to pay $1.50 more at the store for my happy eggs and happy chickens. I want them to have good lives, Apples are great, but the pesticides on them, strawberries more. So, we are a group of people that are conscious of GMOs, and while we can't always eat organic, we can make effort to stay informed and away from the things where they're combining things that are not meant to go together. Animal and plant DNA are not meant to be combined. Maybe plant and plant, fine, but not plant and animal. And of course, the pharmaceuticals have gone over the top. I mean, if you look at the commercials, I'd say every other commercial is a car commercial. And the ones that aren't maybe 4 kinds of commercials. Cars are 1/4, pharmaceuticals are 1/4, and then everybody else is the other, half. So over and over again, they are pushing these drugs on us in order to get us hooked. And once people get on these drugs, it's really hard for them to get off. And so it's almost like they're trying to anesthetize us and make us codependent on them, it's like when Nikola Tesla invented free energy. J.P. Morgan burned down his place and said, "Who wants a cow that you can't milk?" And this is what it looks like to me, is that we're the cows and they're milking us. And if they can get us hooked, then great. And before it was alcohol and tobacco, the tobacco companies. Despite the fact that if you ever seen pictures of somebody's lungs that really smoke, it's horrible what we're doing to our bodies. And alcoholism, I mean, I grew up in a family where my dad was a military officer, and they had, the social drinking hour, free drinks at the officers club. And I'm sure those men going through World War II and the Korean War, they were really trying to process all the horror they had been through, and they didn't have marijuana. They didn't have something else. All they had was alcohol, And so, let's ply them all with alcohol so they can go home and fall into bed with their wives and get up the next day and do it all again. How many of you had parents that had drinking problems? Yeah, absolutely. And so we are a generation that has said this is not working. And, of course, they figure once people still drink, obviously. There are 3 or 4 wonderful restaurants that have closed down, and now there are bars there. And the bars are still doing fine, so clearly it's a very healthy business. But unhealthy business. Yes, it's a very unhealthy business.
A lot of the prescriptions are now coming out of China.
Well,
They're manufacturing most of the prescription drugs we're using.
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised simply because you know, so much has been outsourced. You know, but who's behind it? They're American pharmaceuticals. They're just paying the workers because they're cheaper over there. So we now, of course, have this opioid addiction problem that we've become aware of. Well, certainly there are people who actually are in physical pain, and the opioids can help them. But basically, there's three kinds of drugs. There's the body drugs, like the downers, like Quaaludes, and the uppers, like Speed. Okay, somebody can use it for a test to study, but you should never use those things on a regular basis. They're the opioids, and those basically make you feel euphoric, like opium and heroin and all those, cocaine, but they basically cause you to live in the illusionary world, okay? And then there are the psychedelics, like mushrooms and peyotes. Those are teacher plants that are about opening your consciousness to higher awareness. They are not addictive plants, and they should not be addictive in any way, but they are about expanding your consciousness to find out who you are, like jumping up on a trampoline and getting a view of the higher worlds, and then going, oh, this is what I learned, now come back down to earth and get to work, okay? So to me, those are the only ones really worth using, and even so very, very sparingly. These can be used certainly for a short period of time to help somebody with pain or whatever, but there are so many people that are like, you know, hey, I just feel good all the time, so I'm just going to keep taking them. And it's hard to get off of them, because they're highly addictive, you know, and they may actually be physically addictive. Like nicotine is actually, there are receptors in the brain for nicotine. And that's why when people start smoking nicotine, as bad as it is for them, it's really hard for them to give it up, because those receptors in the brain are like, oh, we couple very easily with the nicotine molecule. So I don't know enough about this to know, but it's quite possible that that's also true. So we've got some problems. However, for all of our problems, this is also a time of great change, great hope. There are people like ourselves waking up all over the world more and more every day, asking questions. There are organizations like Portal to Ascension that are helping to spread the knowledge, helping to wake people up to things like ancient history and human potential. And, you know, it's really important work. We are moving into a time when the divine feminine is beginning to come back. And of course there are elements of the patriarchy that are scared to death of this, but the whole thing about the feminine is it's not interested in getting rid of the men. They love their men. The feminine honors the sacred masculine as well as the sacred feminine. And that's one of the big differences. They're not about having power and misusing it. But many women who come into power today, their only model for power has been a male model. And so in order to climb the corporate ladder, it's that, like that old thing, you know, I have to do twice as much work for half the pain dancing backward in high heels. But fortunately, it's not hard, okay? Did you ever see that saying? You know, it has been true. The women had to basically say, in order to compete with the men, they had to be as ruthless, as smart, as educated, as territorial. And that's not the answer either. Maybe it was a temporary answer, but if you look at the feminist movement, you know, in the beginning of the feminist movement, for so many decades, there were so many angry women. I mean, I would go to New York to teach, and the men would say, Tricia, could you please tell the women not to scowl at us when we open the door for them? And I'll say, yes, because the men were still, some of them were still really trying to be gentlemen, and the women were just so angry from centuries of suppression that, you know, they were not even being honoring to the men that were actually trying to help them. And so there has to be a balance, and we're, you know, it's like a pendulum, and now we're kind of coming to where there's more in the middle. But fortunately, organizations like the Me Too movement and I think Time's Up movement are starting to say, you know, this isn't right. And if you watch on television, there are some fabulous men that are champions for this. The late night comedians, Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, Seth Meyers, those guys are so fabulous, and they are totally all about helping the divine feminine as well as being great men, okay? And, you know, bravo for those guys, because they're that's what we need, is men who are willing to stand up for men and women. And just like we need women who are willing to stand up for men and women. It's not one or the other. Then we're out of balance. So it's a time when the divine feminine is meant to really reemerge. And I'm going to be showing you, when we start talking about the cycles of time, how when we go beneath the plane of the galaxy, like a sine wave, the masculine comes in to become dominant. And when we go above the plane of the galaxy, the divine feminine reemerges and our spiritual gifts reawaken, and we have more access to what we think of as magic, or the ability to manifest our reality, or to display special power. And if we can get access today, I'll show you a video of some of the special powers and abilities that people all over the world are beginning to display, from telekinetic ability to invisibility. So if we can get on the feed, we'll try to do that on one of our breaks. I'll show you some of that this afternoon, which will be really fun. So the divine feminine, believe it or not, is the pearl of great price. And this is what, of course, in the Song of Solomon, it's talked about, that all the great solar lords actually seek to honor this, because she represents the power of love and the power of unity. And of course, what the great solar lords have all taught has been love and unity. This is what Christ is all about. Love and unity. This is what Buddha was all about, love and unity. So it is that pearl of great price, and it's what in the Hindu tradition would be called the Omne Padme Hum. Have you heard that chant before? Omne Padme Hum. Ma would be the mother, Pa would be the father, Padme Hum is the human, hue, and it really means the jewel in the lotus. Okay, and the jewel in the lotus would be the cosmic couple in the cosmic egg, at the heart of all things, the proton and the neutron, if you think about it. Inside the center of the atom, the pearl in the middle of all creation. So most of you may not know much history about the divine feminine. I just finished doing a 9-hour, 6-part class on Mary Magdalene and the history of the sacred feminine, her hermetic symbols, how she's been expressed all over the world. And actually, they only offer it for 1 month, and you can still order it, and then you can just watch it in your own leisure. It's through Sacred Stories Media. So if you Google Sacred Stories Media and Sacred U University, they have a publishing division, a magazine, they have all these things. Just up at the top, click on Sacred U, and you'll find the course. There's one I've done on Jesus that's 7-part and 9 hours, and then there's one I've done on Mary Magdalene and the Sacred Feminine, and the whole quest for the Holy Grail, and the lineage of the Christ Kings, and the history and archaeology of the goddess. But I'm just going to share a little teeny weeny bit of just like a couple of slides with you today about this. Most people do not realize
The
Sacred Stories Media and Sacred U, like U, Y, just a big U, not Y-O-U, but a U like a university. And go to them. You can still order it, but that class is going to be taken down right around the 18th or the 20th. So I may be able to get her keep it up till the 23rd or 24th, but she only offers them for 30 days, and then she takes them down, and sometimes she brings them back much later in the year. Like my Jesus course will come out again at Christmas, but she just actually allowed, because it was Easter, she allowed people to order the Jesus class. So you might still be able to order the Jesus class, but then it will go away where you can't order it again until December 1st. And it's all, again, very, very reasonable. And once you download it, you've got it forever. But they're great classes. So let me talk about this. In the 1950s, there was a woman from Lithuania called Maria Gumbatas, okay? And she was born and raised in Lithuania, which was the old country. And she studied in Austria, Germany, the US. She was fluent in 25 languages. Can you imagine what kind of mind? 25 languages, Lord. She became a graduate fellow at Harvard in 1950 and taught at Harvard for 12 years. Then she moved to the University of Los Angeles in 1963. And finally, she began her own archaeological excavations in 1967 for 15 years. This is the area she worked in from 67 to 1980, and overseeing 5 major Neolithic digs in Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Turkey, and Greece. And what happened is she began to find symbols of the goddess language, Hermetic symbols. And because she had grown up in the old country where Christianity did not exist in Lithuania until the 14th century, there were many symbols that were still all around her in her country, and her grandmother and her mother knew this language and had passed this down to her. So when she began to come across all these symbols in Greece and the Mediterranean, she realized what was happening, and she realized that these were cultures that were far more ancient than the patriarchy. And what she basically discovered is that around 1600, 1800 BC, there were these very sort of patriarchal tribes that came down from Russia, the Russian steppes, the Kurgans. If you remember, not Outlander, you know, the one about the guy that lives forever, you know, the immortal guy that lives... Highlander. Do you remember that mean guy that came? He was a Kurgan, okay? That's how I was like, the Kurgans! I remember him from Highlander. Yeah, so the Kurgans came down and they basically murdered all the men and they raped the women and took them as wives, okay? And this was, men and women in the Mediterranean had been living in peaceful settlements where they shared power, they were in rulership together, and there weren't any wars. It was great. And so, and also the Semitic tribes, the same thing. They had a whole patriarchal thing coming in where they came in. And then there are others that believe it might have been the Phoenicians. Phoenicians actually were remnants of Atlantis that were at the end of the Atlantean age, and those were kind of warlike guys. And so it seemed like it came from several points at once. And what happened is the real peaceful and tuned in guys got killed, and the women that survived, you know, became property, basically. And so she began to uncover these incredible Venus statues, and other archaeologists began to wake up to this, and so they've been discovered now all over the world, and they're able to carbon date them. This one goes back 40,000 years in our human history. This one 24,000 to 26,000, and this one 20,000 to 30,000 years. Now these look like women who need to go on a diet, you know, in our modern day. I mean, these are not the most attractive, hot, sexy New York model girls. They've got big bulbous breasts and everything else. They're fertility symbols. It's not about being a Hollywood model. It's about saying, I am the great mother that gives life, you know, drink from my breast. I have so many of them, you know, I'm the fount of milk and honey for everybody, okay? And of course, when we look at images, for example, of Artemis Diana, she's depicted sometimes with 20 or 30 breasts. She didn't really have 20 or 30 breasts. It's a Hermetic symbol, okay? To say, you know, I am the cow of milk and honey. Okay, you can have whatever you need from me. Hathor, the great cow in Egypt. You know, you literally see the priest like sucking from her teats as a big cow. It's a Hermetic symbol, okay? She's not really a cow. It's just a symbol to say all the bounty of life comes from me. Okay, if you have a cow in your stable, you can get your milk, your buttermilk, you know, you can get your whatever, what else? Yogurt, yes, your egg, not your eggs, sorry, they don't lay eggs, that's chickens, sorry. But you can eat, basically. So this takes us back to a much earlier time in human history, and what they've discovered is that it goes back 230 to 800,000 years. I'm not kidding. They have found some of these goddess figures that go back that far. Well, that blows our whole timeline totally out of the water that we were talking about yesterday, when we were only going back like, you know, 50,000 or 100,000 years. So this is a temple in Malta. Malta is one of the remnants of the great goddess cultures. She's called the sleeping goddess of Malta. And you can see she's very rotund here. She looked like she certainly ate a lot of bread and cheese, okay? But, you know, it's a symbol. It's a Hermetic symbol. So this was a time when God was considered the divine mother, because everyone could see that the only one that ever gave birth in any species was the feminine. So who would have birthed the universe? Well, it's natural to think it would be the divine mother, okay? And as long as that idea was held, we did not have any war. Can you imagine societies with no war? And of course, this is where we've fallen out of balance in our last few thousand years. There is nothing wrong with a beautiful aspect of the divine masculine. We need him. He's part of our balance. But when we just have the commanding, punishing God that we saw in the Old Testament, then we have blame, fear, shame, rape, pillage, take what you want, and who cares? We have power that's out of control. And so, if in my book about the divine Sophia, I track how this actually happened, and how even in the Jewish culture for a long time it was the divine father and mother, and then became the divine father, mother, daughter, and son. But then the priest of Yahweh rose up and got rid of the mother, the daughter, and the son. We got the son back with Christianity. We never got the daughter back at all. Daughter of God, what are you talking about? Most people have no clue what you're talking about. We got the mother back in Mary. But then, I like have a book of some of her 250 appearances around the world. And in the preface by the Catholic Church, it says, we just want to be very clear. She was just a human woman who lent her womb to the Son of God. There was nothing really special about her. She's not divine or anything. We want to just make this really clear, okay? And then they go on to talk about 250 appearances all over the world. And, these appearances have been in many places. Some of the most famous are Guadalupe in Mexico, 1531, Lourdes in France in 1858, Fatima in Portugal, and the prophecies that came with that from 1917, right before World War I, and she prophesied World War I, World War II, and she said Russia was key, that if we could turn the hearts of Russia, then the world would prosper. As we can see with Putin, he is, every week trying to figure out how to aggravate somebody, okay? And Medjugorje in 1981, and Medjugorje is in Yugoslavia, and these are just some of them. She's appeared to the Arabs, she's appeared to the East Indians, she's appeared to people all over the world, every culture of the world. And anyway, if you're interested in learning more about the history of this very important part of our history, and grounding it in some kind of actual history and science, I would, like, for example, in the Hermetic symbols, this is all Isis's crown. Mary inherited Isis's crown, okay, and it's Stella Maria. It's the Queen of Heaven. Okay, so anyway, I teach all this in those courses if you're interested. So it's a time when the masculine and feminine have a chance to finally return to balance with one another, and we're very lucky. We live in America. America is kind of the leading edge of this, and Europe also, is great in many ways. I love Europe, but for example, when I met with Shama just recently, I was asking how the politics were going over there. She likes Pope Francis, by the way. She thinks he's good. Because the last time I was in Italy, I was reading about all these scandals where the president, was having all these parties with these girls that were brought in as prostitutes and hookers, and some of them had actually come out now and revealed the secrets of what was happening. And she said, no, it's the same. Women are just treated the same as ever. So let me say, we're in a process. We're in a slow, evolution with this. But we are much luckier than our Muslim sisters, okay, who are having to cover themselves up, their heads and their faces, and wear black burqas in 106-degree weather. Okay, so we still have a long way to go in this regard, but this is a really key piece, and the more men and women we can have that are supporting this from a balanced place, a place that honors both. Okay, if the men were being suppressed, I'd be standing up here fighting for the men. Both sides need to be honored. It's really important. And it's the only way, by balancing within ourselves and working to balance it in the world, that our world, I think, has a chance to return to balance. Because as long as the same old patriarchal good old boy system of suppression and abuse continues, as we see again and again, it's just not going to change it. Now, on the positive side, classes like this are being held. If we were having this class 500 years ago, I'd be burned at the stake. Literally, the Inquisition ended in the mid-1800s, I'm not kidding, in Spain. The last witch burning. That was only, not even 200 years ago. So the good news is there are centers like this beautiful inner space that have set up all over the country. As much as possible, we always want to try to support them so that they'll stay in business. And of course, some of the chains have put people out of business, and even the big chains like Barnes & Noble that are great, and Dalton Bookstore, and what was the other one? Borders, you know, they got put out, some of them, by Amazon. Mm-hmm. So we really want to continue to support them because it's bringing forth this ancient wisdom. We want to support groups like Portal to Ascension or you know, Sacred U University, and if Gaia can behave, Gaia Television, you know, if they can not be so territorial and allow their message to be one of the outlets where this knowledge is shared.